So, thank you all for inviting me here today. It's great to see so many. It's kind of funny, whenever I come and visit a new pirate party, you very quickly get a feel for the sheer energy in the room, the enthusiasm, the amount of people that have just gathered because they're pissed and they want to make a difference. You can feel this in every country where the party grows and becomes a significant factor. In particular, I remember going to Germany for the first time. This was in 2006. We hadn't broken through ourselves really yet, and it was sort of like, okay, we're going to Munich, expected to see a couple of guys with a website. And instead, we come into conference room pretty much like this. I say we because my vice chairman, Christian, was there with me. And it's like 50 people at a conference. And we realized that, okay, this is for real. And I see the same thing here in Tampere today. A lot of people who have gathered, determined to make a difference. And that tells me that you guys have every opportunity in the world to pull this off. Because don't underestimate the work ahead. It's hard. It's real work to get out on the streets, to talk to people, to gather signatures. It's a hurdle. It's tough getting into Parliament. But you guys have every opportunity to pull this stunt off and put your names into history. So, a small presentation about what I'm going to talk about. It's easy to see the pirate fight as something new, something isolated, something triggered by technology. Actually, what arrives into your mind when you look at this, in particular when you talk to other pirate parties, is that history tends to repeat itself. We're part of a cycle. I'll talk about what you need to think about. Oops. Hey, I won. What you need to think about in order to pull this off, and what where other parties have stumbled. Not everybody succeeds, unfortunately, but I think you have a very good chance of doing so. And ending with some useful, common canned answers to common questions. This quote is on the inside of my front door. I see it every time I leave my apartment. What it means is not break the law. What it means is that if you always do what other people expect you to do, you're not in control of your own life. And that applies at all levels. It applies to your career, it applies to your relationships, romantic and with friends, and it applies politically. If you follow the rules, if you do what other people expect you to, you will always lose. And that's part of why the right thing to do right now is to stop talking to politicians and say, we aim to take your jobs from you instead. That gets their attention. Looking at history, every new global political movement follows the same pattern. Everyone starts with illegal activism. If you look at the labor movement, you had wild strikes. You even had some sabotages. If you look at the green movement, you had, again, sabotages. You had activism. If you look at the liberal movement, civil liberties movement, you had people freeing slaves. You had people generally going against the establishments in ways that were illegal at the time. The second step is when people who carry these ideas stop being underground and instead rally around a flag. They go above ground, they go above desk. They say that we are proud of these ideas and we think they're right. The third step is when the ideas politicize. People carry the ideas into parliament. This happened when the labor movement went from wide strikes to labor unions to social democrats. This happened with the green movement that went from sabotage to Greenpeace to the Green parties. This happened with the civil liberties movement that went from freeing slaves to holding organizations into all of a sudden forming parliaments and democracy movements all over the world. And we follow this pattern too. We've gone from being activists, a lot of activists still, a lot of people are still active, a lot of people are still declared legal. We have a lobby organization. In Sweden we had the Pirate Bureau, Piratbyrån. In Finland you have Piraatiliitto. There's also EFFI and other people who have carried the torch for ideas that are politicizing. And even though the pace have stepped up, the pattern is the same. Every new global political movement has introduced genuinely new ideas that have not been possible to measure on a previous scale. When liberals arrived on the scale, on the scene, and democracy was introduced, they were asked, did they favor the church or state? Well, they didn't. They favored the individual. So the scale turned from being church or state to church and state versus individual. Then came the socialists. Socialists were asked, well, are you conservative or liberal? And they said, well, screw you, we're neither. So socialists came on stage and the scale turned to being conservative and liberal on one side and socialists on the other. Then came the Green Party, same thing all over again. And then, here we are. Are we left or right? Screw you. That's not part of our ideas. And finally, every new generation, it's been said, must reconquer democracy. There are many examples of this. In 1850s, when the first parliaments were established, conservatives versus liberals. Some were actually even earlier, but you could say that in the US, for example, that's when male universal suffrage was pretty much established. 1880s, labor movements rebelled against corporate oppression of the individual worker and their time. 1920s, civil liberties movements rebelled against many states in Europe, and democracies were established. Universal suffrage was established. 1960s, civil rights movement rebelled against corporate oppression and warfare. This was the Vietnam era. And established solid foundations for civil liberties. This was essentially the end of apartheid in the US, for example. In 1980s, the Green movement rebelled against corporate oppression over our common environment. Every new generation has fought for their rights. Every new generation has reclaimed rights from the previous establishment. And one generation after the Green movement, it's our turn. We are part of history. History repeats itself over and over again.